Function with Purpose podcast. All things health, wellness, fitness, and education through the physical therapy perspective. I am Dr. Amy Bullock, owner and founder of Fortress Physical Therapy. Fortress PT is here to serve the Charlotte metro area by highlighting the importance of how and why physical therapy should be a part of your health and wellness lifestyle. Here we go. Welcome to Season 12, Episode 7 of the Function with Purpose podcast. This is going to be part 1 of part 2 of a series pertaining to Zone 2 exercise or training. I am Dr. Amy, host with you today. Thanks for joining in. And today's part 1 of this part 2 Zone 2 training is really going to focus on what and kind of how the concepts behind Zone 2 training does for your health and the importance of why we should implement this. So the main thing with this episode, it's going to be a little bit of science-y, but hopefully I can break it down a little bit more easier for you. And then part 2 will be kind of getting into, how to know and implement Zone 2 training exercise into your personal fitness journey. Okay. So you're going to want to grab this coffee if you're listening in the morning, or whatever, water, or if you're on a long drive. So hang in there and let's get at it. So Zone 2 training, this is also known as aerobic training. So the word aerobic means in the presence of oxygen, or the need of oxygen in order to do work. So a lot of the analogy behind this is when we think of Zone 2 or aerobic training, we think of long distance running. That's probably the first thing that pops in my head that I think about. Okay, something that's long distance, greater than 3 minutes. So maybe like, a 500 meter run, or up to, a marathon run. But in general, when we hear the word aerobic, we need to correlate that with oxygen, the need for oxygen in order to sustain activity. So it's not running, it's doing an activity for a kind of like a long period of time. So kind of change that thought process. So Zone 2 exercise, aka aerobic training, means the use of oxygen for a long period of time, or stamina. That's another good verb or noun, stamina. So you're building stamina, you're building endurance to perform an activity. So kind of getting into, from a biology point of view here, like why should I do aerobic training or Zone 2? Well, there is some good content out there, and I do want to highlight this. My colleague, Dr. Zach Long with the Barbell Physio. If you're not following that guy, you need to. He is just so full of knowledge, and so I'm going to link an article of his in the podcast notes, but so I'm going to be a little bit stemming off of what he talks about from the biology point of view, and then I'm going to give a little bit more my 2 cents as to a little bit more in depth. So what does Zone 2 training do for our health? There's in the body, there are these little cells within specifically muscle, called mitochondria. And mitochondria are the energy systems within a cell. So our body is made up of mitochondria, and all of our tissue is. So mitochondria actually produces energy. It's also known as, or termed as, the powerhouse of the cell. It does a lot of function in order to maintain healthy tissue, healthy functioning. And sometimes the mitochondria can become dysfunctional and lead to disease like diabetes, cancer, hypertension, cholesterol. So mitochondria, the mitochondrial cells or organelles, are very, very important in order to sustain life. So zone 2 training actually increases the number of mitochondria production. And when we have more energy, or these mitochondrial cells within, for example, our muscles, our working muscles, then we have more energy per se to do things, to sustain things, to go longer, right? So when we have more mitochondria, we have more energy production to perform function. And the more mitochondria our cells have, the less likely we will experience disease or sickness. It just makes sense, right? Because these mitochondria organelles are constantly turning over and building energy production. And we need energy in order to sustain bodily functions, to stay alive, right? So zone 2 training increases actual mitochondrial organelle production. Super important. Oh my gosh, Amy, I already want to do zone training. You already have me hooked. Good. All right, I'm going to get in a little bit more in depth here. Another aspect or effect of zone 2 aerobic training is that in relation to the increase in mitochondria production, it also, the mitochondria is able to kind of recycle the junk. So, when we exercise or perform resistance training, it's just a natural process that we produce byproduct like lactate. And sometimes and that's a good thing, but sometimes lactate can stay in the area for too long. In that area, perhaps in the muscle, maybe it's not as densely populated with mitochondria. So it's just hard to kind of flush that area out. Well, guess what? If you start doing zone 2 training and stay consistent with it, you're increasing mitochondrial production, which then in turn also flushes or gains more clearance of these unnecessary prolonged dump of these byproducts, right? So you're flushing out the muscles where lactate production can stay and hang out, right? You're flushing out your blood vessels where, maybe glucose, aka diabetes, the glucose production won't stay in the bloodstream as long. So the mitochondria helps drive the stuff or the junk out of your blood vessels. So there's better clearance of these byproducts, which then leads to feeling better, right? You're recovering better. You're recovering faster. So zone 2 training flushes our system, right? So it all comes down to the mitochondria, if you're not catching on already. So another kind of like in-depth point of view here from the biology standpoint is that when we have increased mitochondria production or energy production, right, which then is able to quickly and more effectively flush our system or recover faster, we also have a positive trade-off. So when we do longer training bouts of, longer than 2 minutes of work or endurance capacity, stamina work, we have an indirect effect of performing higher work in our anaerobic energy systems. So at the beginning, I talked about zone 2, aka is aerobic training, meaning you need oxygen to do the work. Well, there's also a sister energy system called the anaerobic energy system. So anaerobic means without oxygen. So I like to think of movements anaerobically as quick bouts of movement. So think of, maybe like a 100-meter sprint, or football players, right? They're working for 30 seconds and then they're resting for like 90 seconds when they perform plays, right? So that's that anaerobic energy system. So guess what? Zone 2 training, the more that we can own it and hone it and incorporate it, has a strong indirect effect in improving anaerobic training, right? Those quick bouts, the higher energy output, or if we're talking about our training zones, heart rate training zones, it's that higher training zone bout in that 3, 4, and 5 working zones. So you create this snowball effect in a good way that you're able to sustain and produce more power within anaerobic energy training thresholds. How cool is that, right? Because we know that the mitochondria, getting back to the mitochondria, as I spoke about, they require oxygen, right? So they have a very, very strong influence on activity that does not require oxygen. So it has that sprinkle or carryover effect that it supports anaerobic training more effectively and efficiency. So you feel better and you feel better, stronger, powerful, coordinated when you perform higher threshold intensities that are a minute and a half or less, or 30-second bouts, or 10 seconds, or a 100-meter sprint, right? You feel more fit when it comes down to it. So zone 2 training has that trickle over sprinkle effect. How cool is that, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm already hooked on, increases mitochondrial production. Who doesn't want that, right? I want more oxygen in my body. So, another unique and kind of a little bit in-depth point that I want to talk about with, aerobic training in general is that from a heart standpoint, our heart, right? Our heart has 4 separate chambers. And the chamber that I kind of want to talk about here is called the left ventricle. Now you can Google this. You can ask AI, what's the left ventricle do of the heart? I'm just going to give it to you right here. That the left ventricle of our heart is the chamber of the heart that pumps blood to our entire body. Okay? That is the chamber that is directly affected from aerobic training zone 2 work. So with zone 2, we are actually getting down to the nitty gritty here, creating what we call an eccentric contraction of the left ventricle of the heart. So by creating this kind of elongated eccentric contraction of the left ventricle of the heart, we're actually inducing hypertrophy. Hypertrophy means building muscle. We're creating a bigger, what we call a cross-sectional view or cross-sectional area of the cardiac fibers within that left ventricle of the heart wall. It's getting thicker, like it's getting bigger, right? It's no different than doing a biceps curl. Think Arnold Schwarzenegger style. Fast lifting that barbell up and then really slow down as you're lowering the barbell back into elbow extension or straight arm. Fast up, slow down, like a 4-second descend down. That lowering or that eccentric stretch contraction pulls on muscle fibers even more. It creates, it sounds like a negative word, which it is not in this case. It creates muscle damage so that oxygen or the mitochondria can come into play and rebuild more tissue or create and induce hypertrophy. So with the left ventricle of the heart, this zone 2 aerobic training creates an eccentric stress to the cell walls of that heart, which then creates a positive effect when that left ventricle stretches and it gets ready to contract and push blood out into our full body. It does it with better ease, aka efficiency. So when that produces that strong contraction to push the blood to our arms, to our legs, to our insides, right? Like our intestines, to our brain, to our eyeballs, by having a thicker or stronger heart, or aka cardiac tissue, through zone training and aerobic training, the heart can have a stronger contraction to push blood out faster and more efficiently. So there's some other things when this happens, when aerobic training happens, there's some metrics that we can track for our health. It is so basic, a caveman can do it. Some metrics that I would be interested in order to feel and see effects of aerobic training, are resting heart rate, as well as exercise heart rate. You know, you become more efficient of staying in your zone 2 heart rate training, which this is heart rate training in order to determine zone 2 will be on the next podcast. So you'll have to wait for that. Your sleep. Even tracking your glucose levels, right? Even though you may not have diabetes, why not track glucose? Right? Taking your blood sugar in the morning. Pricking your finger or getting a continuous glucose monitor, right? I think one of the big things is kind of the resting heart rate. The lower the heart rate is kind of a product of how fit you are, right? So those are some metrics that I would be tracking. Even heart rate variability. Now the cool thing is, I'm not sponsored, I have a Fwp band, and Fwp does all this tracking for me. And it spits out data, and I can see it right there live. I can see it week to week, day to day, month to month, year to year. So I don't have to worry about that stuff because I'm being constantly tracked. And I like it. I'm a data person, and the things that I do are going to affect my health metrics. So if that might be a pain in the ass for you to, bust out a blood pressure cuff or do the glucose monitor thing or, get the resting heart rate or, track your sleep and all that jazz, you might look into a Whoop band. But tracking the health metrics and seeing them change over time in a positive direction is a good thing, right? You're becoming more fit. But the cool thing about the science of what zone 2 training can do for your health is through the roof. There's another article that it came from the CrossFit website, but this is one of the OG articles from the CrossFit Journal back in the day. This was Greg Glassman wrote this. He used to be the owner of CrossFit. Well, he found the methodology in general. So, smart guy. This is back from the CrossFit Journal in 2002. I will link that. But, what is fitness? And he kind of talks about, CrossFit's definition of fitness, their first, second, and third standards of what encompasses fitness. And a cool thing that I like, a visual thing, is the sickness, wellness, and fitness continuum. And man, is it dead on. So the goal is to move away from that sickness pendulum, right? And we want to hover between wellness and fitness. So getting back to this zone 2 aerobic training, zone 2 aerobic training isn't just for endurance type athletes, right? It's for sure for the general population like us, like me, like you. Why aren't we doing this? We're barely, in general, the world, the USA, are barely hitting the minimum standards of, 150 minutes of exercise or movement weekly in order to gain fitness. So in general, the population, the general population, is pendulating towards that sickness realm. But just by being aware and understanding what zone 2 aerobic training can do for your health, and really having that mind shift situation under your belt, that, oh my gosh, this is something that is going to be a part of my lifestyle in a non-negotiable. So reiterating, I want to make this clear that zone 2 training from a biology point of view is really comes down to the mitochondria, the energy production of cells, the energy production of a living human being, right? Zone 2 aerobic training increases mitochondrial production, which then in turn promotes the capability to do more work, promotes better recovery after we exercise or do a fitness competition, etc. It also, the increased mitochondrial production, right, brings in oxygen. It needs oxygen. Well, guess what it does? That oxygen in the mitochondria, because it does so many things, so many functions in our body, it flushes out the bad stuff in our system. It gains better clearance for recovery to happen faster. So we don't have lactate or glucose hanging out in our bloodstream, right? Because if we have that stuff hanging out in our muscles and blood, well, guess what? It points the arrow towards the sickness and disease realm, aka diabetes, aka potential cancer, aka cholesterol, aka high blood pressure, aka metabolic disease, metabolic dysfunction. Right? And then zone 2, because of this mitochondria, has a indirect or direct effect, actually more direct effect, to doing more work without the use of oxygen. So anaerobic training, doing more work in those higher working zones of 3, 4, and 5, doing more work and recovering faster. It's more efficient. You become a more effective and robust human. And then lastly, that really, really reiterates, this is honestly probably what I think of all the time, is that specific direct hypertrophy of the left ventricle of the heart. The more strong you can get that left ventricle, the more efficient you will overall feel, right? Because what does the left ventricle of the heart do? As I mentioned earlier, it is the area of the heart, the chamber of the heart that pushes, with every heartbeat, blood throughout our entire body, head to toe to our eyeball, right? The more efficient and effective and strong the left ventricle of the heart can be, we will see a change in our health metrics, right? A lower resting heart rate. Your ejection fraction is more effective. I'd have to look that up. I can't remember if it would go up or down. I think it's up. I gotta look that up, right? You are more healthy. You are leaning more on that wellness and fitness spectrum, right? But when it comes down overall, think of this. If there's one thing to take away from this, the zone 2 training, what zone 2 training can do for your health, you produce more capability of doing more things, right? Because you are increasing the mitochondria organelle production throughout your entire body, in your muscles, in your intestine, in your nervous system, in your heart. Because the more mitochondria you have, the less likely you'll become sick or experience disease or metabolic dysfunction. So, hopefully that's not too much over your head, but I know Google's out there and you can just Google this stuff. Sometimes it's nice to hear it from someone, and hopefully I can be that someone. But zone 2 training can significantly change your health metrics or your wellness metrics, right? Which then enhances longevity and lifespan. So know and understand some of the biology behind of what you're doing, because if you don't know that, you're just spinning your wheels. If you can relate something of what you're doing in relation to what you're trying to improve, which we all want to be, robust. I don't know about you. Like, I want to live till I'm 100 and be able to still walk and stoop and maybe jog then and still lift weights, drive a car, be independent, be functional. That zone 2 training, aerobic training, increases mitochondrial production, flushes your body system, right? It flushes the junk out, so it gains more clearance. Essentially, you recover faster, right? Has a direct effect of performing things that don't require oxygen, or aka anaerobic training. So think powerful sprint work, jumping. And then lastly, you're improving or enhancing the left ventricle of your heart. You're creating a more efficient pump. So, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the last episode. Stay tuned because you're going to want to listen to part two of this series on how. Like, how do I know I'm in zone 2, Amy? What a sample exercise regimen look like? How long does it take to get there? Etc. So, salut, and we will see you on the next one. That's a wrap for today's episode, Function with Purpose podcast. For more information on this episode, please check out the show notes within your podcast app. Be sure to subscribe, like, share, or drop your comments and questions below. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thanks for the listen. Pursuit, precision, purpose.